All right, here's some common acids. Nitric acid is a very strong acid. It can be used to help make fertilizer. It's used in explosives, that kind of stuff. Sulfuric acid you'll find in your car battery. Very strong acid. Hydrochloric acid, very strong acid. You can find, gastric acid in your stomach is hydrochloric acid. Muriatic acid that you buy to clean concrete and that kind of stuff, hydrochloric acid. Phosphoric acid is not really strong, not really weak, sort of in between. Okay. You can see what it's used for. Here's some weaker ones. We've seen this before, acetic acid. Carbonic acid, like in your Coke that you drink, in our body that's floating around in our bloodstream, you can find carbonic acid, because anytime you have carbon dioxide and water together in the same environment, you can get the formation of carbonic acid. Okay. All right. Now, what makes these strong and weak? It has to do with the same thing that makes electrolytes strong and weak. A strong acid is not necessarily one that will burn you more than a weak acid. That's not what that's saying. What it's saying is that when you put it into solution and you put it into water, it will fall apart very easily and separate and release a bunch of free hydrogens floating around. Okay? Now these weak acids, like hydrofluoric acid, if you get this on you, if you get a concentrated enough solution on you, it'll burn you just as bad as any of these strong acids will. The reason it's labeled as weak is not because of its potency, but rather because it doesn't dissociate near as well. If you have a container of hydrofluoric acid molecules, you'll see that maybe only a percentage of them have actually fallen apart. Most of them will stay stuck together. So that means there's not as much available free hydrogen floating around. That's where we get these strong and weak terms. Okay? Now when we think back to naming, we had two different types of acids that we named. Binary acids and oxy acids. Okay? Binary acids are like this: hydrogen with one element after it. Oxy acids were going to be using polyatomic ions in the presence of oxygen. Okay, whenever a hydrogen hooks on with a polyatomic ion, then you've got an oxy acid. All right, so here's an example of some binary acids: hydrochloric acid, hydrofluoric acid. Is there nothing else on that page? No. As far as oxy acids, look at the difference. SO4. Okay, SO4 2 negative was a sulfate, polyatomic ion. Oxygen was present in that. That's why it's called an oxy. Okay, this is sulfuric acid. Remember how we go back to naming. Whether it's sulfuric, sulfurous, has to do with ate or ite. This was sulfate. So ate means ick. Ooh, now you got to think back. Can't go back and skip over all that. All right, so here's sulfuric acid. What you will see is whenever you have an oxy acid, the hydrogen that is going to be given off in the reaction that's going to go float around is going to be attached to one of the oxygens. Okay, so you'll see that H2SO4, both of those hydrogens can fall off and go react with something. So this hydrogen here connected to that O, and that one there connected to that O. Okay, here's nitric acid, HNO3. Notice where this guy is. He's hanging off one of the O's. Now, why are these still acids? Because this guy can pull electrons in, right? Oxygen is very electronegative. It can pull over this electron cloud and sort of expose the nucleus of this hydrogen. So when it comes in contact with something, it can fall off very easily, and it can have acidic properties. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. It's held together by hydrogen bonds, sort of like what you'd get with a situation like this. So I mean, it's an acid as well. Okay. The last type of acid that we're going to talk about and not go into much detail on is what's called, what we're going to find in organic chemistry, organic types of acids. Carboxylic acids are a little bit different. I mention this only because we deal with acetic acid, which is an example of this. Here's acetic acid, and here's the Lewis structure for acetic acid. Okay, minus some of the electrons. The electrons around the O aren't shown, but they're supposed to be there. This H right here is the one that's going to be acidic. Remember, I said it's got to be an H that's attached to one of the O's, if you're trying to keep track of it. So what makes this an acid if you're looking at the Lewis structure? See that C double bond O and then OH off to the side? It's called a carboxyl group, COOH. That's what makes it an organic acid. That's how you can notice it. If you're looking at a structure and you see that anywhere, you see these things grouped on, stuck on the end somewhere, then it's an organic acid. Okay. All right. And here's formic acid. This is the simplest one. You just have an H over here. That would be like the chemical that's secreted by like fire ants that will burn the crap out of you when they bite you and that kind of stuff. Bee stings, wasp stings, formic acid. Okay. And then citric acid you consume a lot with fruits, pop, that kind of stuff. All right. I just want to point out that only the first H is the actual acidic one. So this H that you see in front of this acetate ion, this H right here, is actually this H over here. And that's the only one that's acidic. This cannot donate all three of those other three hydrogens. It'll only donate the ones on that oxygen. All right. Bases, also known as alkalis. And you're going to see that alkali and alkaline earth metals, we've talked about those already. The reason is because they like to form basic compounds. That's how they got their names. Okay. So basic, alkaline, it's all related. This means the same thing. They taste bitter. Bitter is not a pleasant taste. Sour can be pleasant. Like those gummy worms you buy that have those big crystals on the top of them that make them sour? That's actually tartaric acid. So we eat a lot of acids. Vinegar, of course, is acetic acid. Anything that sort of makes things taste kind of tart or sour. Bitter is not so pleasant. Anybody ever licked a battery before? If you, yeah, don't be afraid to raise your hand. Hydroxide compounds can form, from when you learn about the electrochemistry of batteries, but that's like a bitter taste. Like really nasty coffee may have a bad bitter taste. I don't know. A lot of good things that you eat. Okay, yeah, well, yeah. The bitter is not pleasant, whereas the sour can be, is what I'm trying to get at. It's kind of hard to explain, but as for an explanation as to why this is the case, it's kind of interesting that most of the toxins that are out there, like a lot of the plant chemicals that are bad for us and that are poisonous, actually are alkaloid, called a plant class of chemicals called alkaloids, which are basic in nature. So perhaps there's a connection there, like a protective purpose. We don't like the taste of bitter because it can protect us from bad things, at least at some point back in history. Anyways, so often these alkaloids are poisonous. But in any case, bases are bitter if you taste them. They're also very slippery. Like soap, for example, that you use, it's actually very basic in nature, chemically. It likes to give off hydroxide ions or take in hydrogen ions. It also feels very slimy. A lot of these other bases, if you could touch them and put them in your fingers and feel them, they'd feel kind of slimy and slippery. All right. They too can change litmus paper colors, but instead of going from blue to red, it'll turn red litmus paper blue, back the other way. So, and then of course they will react with acids to form salts. So we call that neutralization when that happens. So here's some common. We use a lot of these actually more for cleaning purposes, but there's also some antacids up here. Sodium hydroxide. I don't know if lye, and we've all heard of lye. That's what it is. Lye is a very concentrated form of sodium hydroxide. That's why it's dangerous stuff. It'll burn you like an acid. It'll feel like an acid. But the difference is what a base will do is strip off hydrogens. What an acid will do is use its hydrogens to strip off other parts of your molecules that will react. Either way, your molecules are falling apart. And either way, they're going into solution. And either way, it hurts really bad. So they're very similar. But anyways, it's also called caustic soda. You can see where it's used. Potassium hydroxide, you can see what it's used for. These are very strong bases. Notice that the strong bases share this polyatomic ion in common. The hydroxides are very potent. This is lime. Calcium hydroxide is lime. It can be used in cement. It can be used as to spread on soils and that kind of stuff. So, bicarb, sodium bicarbonate, also known as baking soda. You also find that some things that are carbonates can act as bases. We use it for an antacid. We can use it to cook with, to neutralize odors. Think about how that works. A lot of your nasty smells that come up, things like hydrogen sulfide, H2S, are released from protein breakdown, like old meat in the refrigerator. When proteins start to degrade, I've mentioned this before, they're held together by little sulfur atoms in between the lines of proteins. It holds them together. If those sulfur atoms break, they react with hydrogen ions that are around them, whether it's in water, whether it's in air, whatever, it'll form H2S. And then that allows it to go into gaseous form and rise up and enter our nostrils in that pleasant rotten egg smell, that rotten protein smell, what we call sulfur.